In a world filled with garbage, power plants run on rotten vegetables. Plastic is made from avocado pits. Computer parts are a gold mine. These are the big ideas on how to tackle the 2 billion tons of trash people produce every year.
Hey!
This is Worldwide Waste. People throw out 100,000 chopsticks every day here in Vancouver. But now, this local company is upcycling them into shelves, cutting boards, and furniture. Can it help reduce the massive amount of single-use items in restaurants around the world? We visited Chop Value's headquarters in Canada to find out. Chop Value drivers pick up used chopsticks from over 300 restaurants around Vancouver a couple times a week.
Typically about 100 kilograms a day, up to 150. Pre-COVID, it was more closer to like 300 kilograms a day.
The restaurants part with them for free.
After they got in, I believe all 5,000 pairs being recycled and reused, so it's a great thing.
The real work begins at Chop Value HQ. The founder, Felix Bach, calls this place a micro factory. Just like a micro brewery, curious visitors can come in and see how small batches of tiles get made.
And this is how the process looks like from raw material to end product.
First, they sort the chopsticks on the custom-built shaker table. These neat stacks are easier to work with. Then, they dip the sticks into a water-based resin. That provides a protective coating before they roast in a massive oven for 5 hours. The 200-degree heat kills all the germs.
Smells like a bakery.
They need to get separated again so they can be spread out evenly for the next step.
You can take your frustration out on the day inside here.
They're weighed precisely. This batch will make Chop Value's thinnest tile.
So about 560 grams.
Then comes the big squeeze. A hydraulic machine, also invented by Bach's team, compresses the chopsticks with hundreds of pounds of pressure.
The heart of the process that densifies like a cake, a mat of chopsticks into a new uniform engineered material, which is the base modular tile used for all of our end products.
The tiles can be sanded and assembled into furniture, and also cut into smaller products like coasters or even domino pieces. This desk sells for just under $1,000 US. That's about 3 times what you'd pay at IKEA, but comparable to the price of a desk made from solid wood. This piece is made from about 10,000 chopsticks. Chop Value also takes custom orders.
We could do large countertops or boardroom tables or pretty much anything like that.
Since 2016, the company has upcycled 33 million chopsticks that otherwise would have ended up in a landfill. But in China, people use that many wood utensils in one lunch break. There, people throw out 130 million pairs every single day. That means leveling entire forests for a product most people use for just one meal. It's not just Asia. Consumers around the world contribute to this problem.
We all have this drawer filled with plastic cutlery, chopsticks, condiments that we never asked for. Inexpensive, they're cheap, they just come in without you even asking for them.
Sheila Moravati is the woman behind the Cut Out Cutlery campaign. Her organization pressured major delivery apps to opt out of sending cutlery by default. She estimates that saved well over 200 million utensils from going to landfill. Good job, Sheila. Activists in China tried a similar strategy. In 2017, they sued their country's biggest food delivery apps, trying to force them to stop giving cutlery by default. There was a public outcry at the time, but since the pandemic, food delivery with single-use items is higher than ever. So we may never eliminate disposables completely. That's why Sheila says upcycling is so important.
If there are opportunities like that to use something that was going in the trash or headed to landfill, why not? We have so much trash right now, and it's just, we're at the limit. The planet can't take it anymore.
When Chop Value first started, it was only making coasters. Now it has franchises in 3 cities in North America, with more expected later this year. Coasters are still the #1 selling item, but the collection has grown to more than 30 products. And Felix Bach hopes his invention will show people that the next big idea for reducing waste could be right at our fingertips.
You put a few tiles and a few hexagon shelves on your wall, and you can point to your friends to your wall and say, hey, guess what? I have 1,800 chopsticks on my wall. And you start a conversation about sustainability or about recycling.
India produces tons of flower waste every day. But now, one company is giving a second life to these sacred flowers, collecting more than 12 tons of them from temples and transforming them into handmade incense sticks. But can this blossoming startup make an impact on India's flower waste problem? We visited the headquarters of Fool in Kanpur to find out. It all starts in bustling wholesale markets like the one in Shivalaya. Merchants pick up the flowers that they'll sell outside Hindu temples. Because these flowers are used in rituals, they're considered sacred and can't be thrown into the garbage. Every day, more than 1,000 tons of flowers end up in the Ganges River. But many contain toxic chemicals like arsenic, lead, and cadmium, as well as pesticides.
I have been seeing people putting flowers in the water all my life, but never before had anyone questioned temple waste as a source of pollution. The seed was sown.
Ankit founded Fool, which is the Hindi word for flower. The company's employees pick up the waste from temples throughout Kanpur, making around 19 stops a day. Then they transport the flowers to Fool's facility, where they weigh and separate them from thread, fabric, and plastic. Workers save only the flower petals for the incense sticks and sort them by color. They keep the buds and stems to create compost that is sold as a separate product. Then they lay the flower petals out to dry on large tarps. Once they're dry, they grind them into a powder that is mixed by hand with water and essential oils until it reaches a clay-like texture. Then it's time to roll. Workers dip their fingers into the flour powder while rolling to create an even thickness. Then they let the sticks dry before dipping them again in essential oils. They're laid out to dry one more time, then packaged up. Workers here can produce around 400 incense sticks every hour. Ankit calls this transformation flower cycling, and he says his product is cleaner than others.
Normally, incense sticks are made from charcoal. Burning charcoal releases the poisonous sulfur dioxide and gives out a lot of xylene chemicals.
In the beginning, Ankit's family and friends doubted his business.
When I decided to quit my job and come back to Kanpur, the reaction, the immediate people I knew was, I've gone bonkers. That I want to leave a job as an automation scientist and work with temple flowers.
He also had to convince the temples to give his business their sacred flower waste. But he says they didn't initially trust him.
There's this line in the Hindu Aarti which says, Tera tujhko arpan, which basically means what belongs to the gods goes back to the gods. So this is how I used to convince them that these flowers don't belong to you or me, they belong to the gods. And we're using it for the purpose of making incense, which is again being used for worshipping the gods.
Ankit also wants to find other ways of recycling the flowers. He started a research lab to develop new products. They're testing vegan leather and a biodegradable alternative to styrofoam, but those aren't ready for sale. Still, floral waste makes up only about 16% of pollution that runs into the Ganges. Harmful chemicals, open sewer drainage, and garbage run directly into the river. That's a growing danger for the more than 400 million people that rely on the river for drinking water. And despite best efforts to save the Ganges, it's a long way from being restored to anything like its headwaters in the icy Himalayas. Ankit knows his startup can't clean up the river on its own. But he thinks he can help create awareness about a problem he says has been ignored. And he's setting goals to grow his production and waste collection.
Our target is to at least have 50 tons of flour across 5 locations in the country to be able to employ 1,000 women.
For now, every stick sold is infused with the smell of success.
We just can't seem to get enough guac. Last year, Americans consumed more than 6 billion avocados. And that produces a lot of inedible waste. Now, a company has developed a process to transform avocado pits into plastic. Bioplastics like these could help reduce pollution because they break down faster and use less fossil fuels. But how they're made and disposed of determines if they really are a cleaner alternative. We visited Biofase in Monterrey, Mexico to see how it all works. Mexico exports about half of the world's avocados. A single worker at this plantation in Michoacán can cut over 800 pounds of the fruit per day. Many of these avocados will be shipped whole, but some are pitted and processed locally. This factory produces ready-to-eat guacamole and salsa. They tried composting the avocado scraps, but it didn't work. Avocado pits contain oils that made the process complicated. So now they sell their seeds to Biofase. Bioplastics are what we call products that are mostly made of biological substances instead of petroleum. The process starts with avocado seeds that have been washed at the supplying factory.
Nuestro siguiente paso es que la semilla del aguacate entra a nuestro proceso patentado mediante el que nosotros generamos el bioplástico con el que fabricamos todos nuestros productos.
As the seed is going through the machine, it's turned into a bioplastic resin that's ready to withstand a lot of heat. What comes out the other end is a malleable sheet that can be molded and cut into different shapes.
Esta lámina va a pasar en el futuro a un proceso que se llama termoformado, donde esta lámina le vamos a dar una forma, le vamos a recortar y vamos a poder generar productos como contenedores de alimentos, platos, tapas de café, en fin, la imaginación es el límite.
Studies have shown that bioplastics are an improvement over traditional plastics. It takes less fossil fuels to produce them, they contain fewer toxic chemicals, and they decompose faster. The technology to make these products has improved over the past few years and has grown to a nearly $20 billion industry. That's about the same size as the rapidly growing plant-based meat industry. Biofase is part of that trend. The company launched 8 years ago with a single facility. Today, it has 3 locations across Mexico. But there are issues. Bioplastics require special industrial facilities to properly compost, and they can contaminate the regular recycling stream. They're also more expensive than regular plastic, which is made from readily available petroleum.
There are 2 reasons. Because first of all, crude oil is quite cheap right now. And secondly, the production capacity for bioplastics is much lower, while for fossil-based plastic, it's much bigger. So they have an economy of scale in terms of production.
Biofase produces about 130 tons of bioplastics each month. That's equivalent to the conventional plastic waste produced by 13,000 Americans. It's a modest output for now, but Biofase products are shipped across Mexico, the UK, and other countries in Europe, and the company recently expanded to Australia. But there's a long way to go.
Bioplastics, I think, is probably a little bit less than 1% of the fossil-based plastics.
For now, they are mostly used in restaurants. But the idea that biodegradables can be thrown into nature and will eventually go away is false. It can take up to a year for bioplastics to break down in natural conditions. That's still plenty of time to clog waterways or harm animal habitats. Still, that's much shorter than conventional plastic items, some of which will stick around for hundreds of years. Bioplastics can replace some traditional plastics. So far, that's only been tried on a small scale. But thanks to Biofase, we may be one avocado toast away from a cleaner planet. These scientists are making foam from algae. And it could be a game changer for a type of pollution that has a much larger footprint than most people realize. Flip-flops. They're the world's most popular shoe, and they're piling up on beaches and in the ocean. Most are made from plastic foam, which takes decades or centuries to break down naturally. But these researchers growing green, slimy algae may just change that. But can this new kind of foam really replace regular flip-flops? We visited their lab to find out. Steve Mayfield runs the lab that makes the flip-flops. He's studied algae for 35 years, and he's still excited to talk about it.
They are the most efficient photosynthetic organisms on the planet.
And they're easy to grow and harvest in man-made ponds, using less land than plants. The process for turning algae into flip-flops is surprisingly simple. The shoe consists of a footbed made from flexible foam, an outsole made of a more rigid foam, and a cotton strap. To make the foam pieces, the researchers use an industrial machine to mix together compounds created from algae oil.
This is the same machine you'd see if you went into any one of the shoe manufacturers in the world. We want to make sure that the research and the work we do here is relevant to the real world, to the commercial world.
The machine pours the mixture into molds. The team then applies heat, and the foam expands into the shape of a shoe. They wait about 10 minutes for the foam to cure, then peel the pieces out and assemble the finished product.
You put the strap through here and then put the back two parts here, you glue that on, and then this entire thing glues, and that's it. That's all the shoe is. So the manufacturing of these things is also really straightforward.
The sandal is 100% biodegradable. It takes 3 to 6 months to break down in a compost pile, or if it ends up in the ocean, it would take about a year. That's much faster than the average flip-flop made from plastic. And replacing traditional plastic flip-flops with algae-based ones would also reduce the demand for fossil fuels.
Petroleum itself is biodegradable. They become not biodegradable when they go through a refinery and then a chemical company converts them to a plastic that is not biodegradable. So all we're doing is, instead of digging algae oil out of the ground, we're growing algae oil in ponds.
That's why, for years, researchers around the world tried to turn algae into a low-cost, low-emission biofuel. And for the last 15 years, private investors and the US government poured billions of dollars into this research. But despite those efforts, no one has yet figured out how to make algae biofuel cheaper than fossil fuels.
We're always going to be 5 years away from making algae biofuels economically viable. Maybe we should tackle one of the other problems that the world has that are a little easier to achieve economically.
They shifted their focus to biopolymers, or plastic alternatives made from plants. They sell at a higher price than fuel.
Number one, they're about 10 times more expensive than fuel, so the economics works out better. But number two, plastic and ocean plastic pollution is an enormous problem, and we need to address that.
The latest research reveals that plastic pollution is everywhere, even at the lowest depths of the ocean. If current trends continue, the amount of plastic entering the environment annually will nearly triple over the next 2 decades. The problem becomes apparent in places surrounded by water, like the Aldabra Atoll off the east coast of Africa. Last year, researchers collected 25 tons of trash there. They found that nearly a quarter of it was flip-flops.
If you actually look in the world at what shoe is worn by the majority of people on the planet, it's actually a sandal or a flip-flop.
But getting these more sustainable flip-flops into stores remains a challenge. Mayfield founded a company, Algenesis Materials, to start to figure that out.
The best discovery in the world that stays in the lab doesn't really impact the world. What impacts the world is products. Our plan in our startup company was to build a shoe so cool and so sustainable that we forced all of the other companies to pivot and become sustainable shoe brands.
He says they're already working with a major shoe retailer to begin commercial production in Mexico, but the pandemic has caused delays.
Production's going there now, but kind of slow. We hope the flip-flops will be available by sometime next summer.
And the startup faces another big challenge. It can't actually buy enough algae to support its supply chain. For now, it's making flip-flops primarily from plants, not algae.
We get as much as we can from algae, and then we fill in the rest of that using plant oils.
Steve believes the supply will catch up over time as more algae farmers enter the market.
In the future, you will buy 100% algae-based shoes. But if we don't make our first million shoes, then people won't build the algae pond so we can make our next 100 million shoes.
But others, like researcher John Beneman, point out that algae farming will have to increase dramatically in order to support mass production of items like shoes.
We really need 100 times more to be able to hold our heads up.
For that reason, it could be more practical and profitable to make biodegradable shoes out of widely available crops, like soybeans.
The argument that algae have a particular and specific competitive advantage is the one that still needs to be developed.
But Steve argues that algae is better, because growing it requires less land and water than plants. For now, Algenesis Materials is working with oils from non-edible plants.
We choose not to use soybean or canola because those are food oils, so we don't want to compete with food.
Ultimately, growing more algae and using it to make stuff is a step in the right direction.
I'm not sure to what extent this will actually reduce CO2 emissions, blah, 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 etc. But it's definitely stuff we need. We need to have these kind of market entries.
Perfect is the enemy of good enough, right? Meaning that if you always look for the perfect solution, you'll never do anything. You'll just sit around.
In the meantime, Steve says consumers can do more than simply wait for more environmentally friendly options.
Too many people sit back and say, oh, well, I would love to have biodegradable plastics, but they're not available to me. Well, they're not available to you because you don't demand companies make those. I would say the last challenge that I want to put out to consumers is don't underestimate your power and demand that the world change.
"10 tons of food goes unsold every day at this market. But instead of going to a landfill, it's turned into electricity that will power streetlights, buildings, and a kitchen that preps meals for 800 people. This is called biogas. It's plentiful, it's low-tech, and experts say it burns cleaner than any fossil fuel. So why can't we make energy from the 1.3 billion tons of food that gets thrown out every year?" We visited the Bonpali market in Hyderabad, India to find out. The first step is to chop up larger vegetables and load them onto a conveyor belt. Some of the vegetables are spoiled. Others are thrown away because it costs farmers too much to transport them back home.
वो सड़ जाएगा तो फायदा क्या भी नहीं है तरकारी में उसके लिए वो भी बायोगैस प्लांट के लिए यूज कर ले रहा.
The conveyor belt carries the material to a shredder, which further breaks down the food into smaller, more uniform particles. In a single day, it handles the same amount of vegetables that 150 Indians eat in a year. A grinder crushes the mixture into pulp, which is pumped through underground tanks and into 2 digesters.
So anaerobic digesters basically have bacteria which operate in the absence of oxygen, or anaerobic bacteria, and they actually eat essentially the food waste that we are putting in there and give out methane and carbon dioxide.
Any organic materials emit these planet-warming gases as they decompose. But the massive amount of food waste makes landfills the third largest source of human-caused methane emissions, just behind fossil fuels and agriculture. Burning biogas to make electricity is a way to harvest those gases before they enter the atmosphere. At Bowenpally, the fuel can be stored locally in 4 huge balloons until it's ready to use.
And it goes all the way to the kitchen, which is about roughly 400-500 meters away from here.
It's enough power to run a canteen kitchen that serves roughly 800 meals per day. Aside from energy, the plant creates another valuable byproduct: fertilizer. Farmers who sell their wares at the market buy it back and spread it on the same fields where their vegetables grow.
By using this fertilizer, their soils are also getting better, their crop yields are better, and the crops are being sold at higher cost because organic vegetables and all very costly nowadays, organic rice and all these things.
Dr. Rao, a scientist on the project, is already building 5 more plants around the city. And it isn't limited to vegetables. Biogas can be produced from any organic material, including animal and human feces. So if biogas can be locally sourced, cuts down on solid waste, and reduces emissions, why aren't we all doing this? Because in most countries, it's still cheaper to keep burning fossil fuels. In North America, biogas costs nearly 5 times more than natural gas.
Now, you can't compete with what you call gas in the United States if it's 20 cents a gallon.
This gap is smaller in places like Asia, where the difference in price is less than $2 per unit.
A lot of people, a lot of state governments who were thinking about setting up these projects have suddenly understood that yes, it's possible to do it. Yes, there are technologies which are indigenous, which are built in India that can work for them.
The world's biggest biogas plant was recently built in Denmark, and new facilities are being built elsewhere in Europe and Africa. An Israeli company sells a product to make biogas in your backyard. Biogas will never replace natural gas. There's just not enough waste to keep up with the demand for electricity. But it does something that natural gas can't. It helps reduce landfill waste. And it's a huge missed opportunity in the United States, which throws out between 30 and 40% of all food. Even the farmers who lose money when they can't sell their produce believe biogas is better than just throwing it away.
सड़ गया है तो माल बेच देना पड़ता, क्या करते नहीं बेचते, हम डालते उसमें वेस्टेज में वो अच्छा काम कर रहा हो.
And the engineers on the Bowenpally project are hopeful that its success will inspire others.
So these projects have to happen, for us to make life more sustainable, not just for ourselves, but for, let's say, in 20 years or 10 years down the line, the scenario needs to be a little better.
It looks like a giant marshmallow, but it's actually a mushroom. Slice it and you get crispy vegan bacon, or a convincing alternative to leather. And this lab grows an eco-friendly replacement to styrofoam, that light but bulky material taking up 1/3 of the space in all landfills. But can this company grow it fast enough to make a global impact? We visited Ecovative's headquarters in Green Island, New York to find out. The magic is in mycelium, the living root structures of mushrooms.
Our entire philosophy is actually based around this idea that nature provides. Mycelium is a great solution to both the plastics waste problem we face as well as animal agriculture.
I'm taking the mushroom mycelium and then I'm just going to section this petri dish.
All Ecovative products start with these natural building blocks.
We have about 100 different strains in-house, and we will analyze those for the different material properties that they have.
What do you think about the wall thickness on this? It's pretty thin.
The company's best-selling product is called Myco-Composite. It has similar properties to styrofoam, but it's completely biodegradable.
We've worked with a variety of companies, some of them huge companies like Dell Computers, where they've used our earth-friendly packaging to ship servers. We've worked also with small New York startup brands like Keep Candles.
Manufacturers design molds using large recyclable plastic sheets. Heat makes the sheets pliable, so they can be shaped around any product. They start with wood chips, corn husks, or hemp that would otherwise be thrown out by local farms. Then sprinkle in some fungal spores and add water. Pack the mixture into the molds, and the mycelium starts to grow, feeding on the shredded agricultural waste. Just over a week later, the form-fitted mold is ready to ship.
So this jar, and it fits really nice in there.
The final material is a little bit heavier than styrofoam, but velvety soft to the touch. This packaging breaks down in just 30 days. Conventional styrofoam never really goes away. It can stay in the environment for up to 5 centuries, and less than 1% is ever recycled. EcoVative has a different process to make vegan meat and leather, which it claims consumes far fewer resources than the real thing.
And then we're going to take this substrate, which will inoculate this sawdust.
Workers still start with agricultural waste and spores, but these mixtures are placed in vertical farms, growth chambers that mimic the conditions of natural soil.
And so what it's really trying to do is grow up and punch out through the earth to form a mushroom. But we keep the environment such that it just grows and grows into this large marshmallow-like structure.
That marshmallow is called aerial mycelium, and it grows over the course of about 10 days. Their largest chamber can produce up to 200,000 pounds of mycelium per year.
We end up with these large industrial slabs, which can be like 50 feet long and 5 feet wide and a couple inches thick.
In 2018, the company licensed its leather-making process to Bolt Threads. They make Milo, a leather alternative that has been used in clothing and handbags. In 2020, the company launched a line of mushroom-based meat alternatives called My Eats. The My is short for mycelium. The first product is called My Bacon. It's made from aerial mycelium that's cut into slices, compressed, and seasoned.
It fries up and gets crispy just like bacon and tastes pretty amazing too.
We can't confirm the flavor, but My Bacon is definitely a healthier option. It's high in fiber and has the same protein content as a regular slice of bacon, with 1/5 the fat. The company projects that as it scales up, My Bacon can eventually be grown for $1 per pound, 1/5 of the market price of pork bacon. And it takes nearly 600 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of pork, but just over 1 gallon of water to grow a pound of mycelium bacon. Eben Bayer and Gavin McIntyre founded EcoVative Design in 2007 and debuted their myco-composite packaging in 2011. Since then, a growing number of cities and states have banned the use of styrofoam. But the United States does not have countrywide restrictions, and the average person still uses 75 foam coffee cups per year, adding up to 25 billion. In 2020, EcoVative produced over 6 million pounds of its foam alternative, but that's just 0.5% of the cups Americans consumed. My Bacon might have an easier time catching on. The market for meat substitutes is worth about $4 billion and is set to double over the next 5 years.
Bacon is a really important leverage point in the market. It's one of the #1 reasons people say they won't stop eating meat.
Mycelium protein can mimic whole cuts of meat as opposed to most other plant-based alternatives, which come in the form of minced patties or sausages. But right now, My Bacon is only available in one grocery store in Albany, New York. EcoVative plans on branching out to more stores in 2021, and it's currently building farms with the capacity to produce 1 million pounds of mycelium per year. The company recently announced it's raised a total of $100 million in capital. Compare that with Impossible Foods, a more established brand, which has raised $700 million to date. EcoVative Design is a long way from displacing plastics and factory farming. But according to Eben, His company is harnessing the potential of the living world.
My background and journey has been around figuring out how we can reimagine working with nature and using nature to create better solutions for everyday products we have to use as humans that just have less impact on the earth.
Bananas are one of the world's most wasteful crops, and these giant stems are a part of the problem. Farmers typically burn them, but that pollutes the air. So instead, one company in Uganda has figured out how to pulverize them into fiber to make rugs, placemats, even hair extensions. So, could bananas become a green alternative to cotton or silk? We visited the headquarters of TexFad in the outskirts of Kampala to find out. Every banana stem only fruits once in its lifetime before it rots or catches a virus. And for every ton of fruit, plantations produce 2 tons of debris. But in those mounds of refuse, Kimani Muturi saw potential. He founded TexFad in 2013 after discovering his love for hand weaving in college.
I cannot finish using the waste that is out there. It's too much.
First, workers cut the stems into celery-shaped chunks and leave them out to dry in the sun. Then they feed those strands into an extractor, like this one. This is a crucial step and the only part of the process that requires machinery, and it's not cheap. This unit costs anywhere from $1,000 for a used one to $10,000 brand new. That price presents an obstacle for expanding this business. The rest of the work is done by hand. The extracted fibers dry again until they feel like a silky yarn, but one that is as strong as rope. At this point, it's also ideal for dyeing. The final stop is the weaving shed, where the making of household goods and handicrafts begins. Some of the designs on these rugs are inspired by traditional East African patterns. Other products are custom made for clients. It can take up to a month to weave a rug. The price varies, but many start at around $500. TexFad employs 23 people and even offers an internship program for students.
The problem that we have here in our country, we study, we get our degrees, but we don't have opportunities.
Esther Ainebiona has been at the company for about a year. She started as an intern and is now one of the main weavers.
Why I like the people I work with is because they are motivating, they help. There are different groups of people around. It's a very good thing because you interact with people of all ages.
BananaTextiles have been around for centuries in countries like the Philippines, Nepal, and Japan. But TexFad is one of the first companies to bring it to Uganda. And the potential is huge, because the country produces more bananas than any other in East Africa, about 9 million tons every year. That's about 5 tons of fruit for every person in Uganda.
I will never get worried that I won't have materials tomorrow, as long as we Ugandans are eating bananas on a daily basis.
And while Kimani's business has grown over the past 8 years, it isn't enough to make a dent in the $30 billion global banana industry. Environmentalists say that composting the stems into fertilizers would be a more immediate solution.
It prevents dehydration, it prevents deforestation, and it gets a richer soil, and richer soil is a more healthy banana.
Many farms do that, but chopping the stems requires tough manual labor. So for most farmers in Uganda, getting rid of them is easier and faster. Still, these kinds of textiles are biodegradable and are a more sustainable alternative to other popular fabrics. Banana fiber absorbs dyes better than cotton, which means it needs less water and less land to produce. But the special equipment and expertise hold back this method from becoming more widespread.
It could spread over the world if more machines are found and developed that actually makes such thin material that you can use it for the clothing industry, because currently it's quite hard to do so and not a lot of machines have been developed, or it's costly.
Still, Kimani dreams big, even during a pandemic.
I'm just imagining if there was no COVID, I think we would be a little further than we are today.
And he's always innovating.
There is no rocket science in what we are doing here. No. Even people who come to learn here, they don't take much time to learn. But this is just a beginning. I can tell you that banana fiber is the next fiber. The next fiber in terms of sustainable fibers for fashions, and not just for fashions, for everything.
This dough is made with old bread that would have gone to the trash. France throws out more than 150,000 metric tons of bread every year. That's 9 loaves for every citizen. This machine could help close the loop. The crumbler grinds stale baguettes into breadcrumbs that are so fine they can replace flour. But is this idea enough to reduce food waste in bakeries across the country? Bakery Pomponette is one of the more than 100 bakeries in France that uses the crumbler. Bakers here slice unsold baguettes and drop them into the crumbler's silver chimney. Today, Guillaume Devenant and his apprentice Elodie are making a fresh batch of his signature baguette, the 20%.
En fait, c'est la recette de ma baguette normale, habituelle, dans laquelle j'enlève 20% de farine, que je remplace par de la chapelure.
Elodie measures flour, salt, yeast, and water. Then she weighs the exact amount of crumbs needed for the recipe. She adds the breadcrumbs and then kneads the ingredients to form a dough, which will rest overnight.
La pâte, elle est de couleur brune, ce qui est tout à fait normal puisqu'on a rajouté de la chapelure en fait à l'intérieur. Donc ça fait pas une pâte blanche comme on a l'habitude nous en France d'avoir. Là, c'est quelque chose de plus foncé et plus croustillant.
This machine helps shape it into baguettes. Devenant rolls the dough once more and adds the finishing touches before baking.
J'avais un problème de pain au tout début que j'ai ouvert la boulangerie, c'est qu'il me restait beaucoup de pain à la fin de la journée et je ne savais pas quoi en faire.
That is, until 3 years ago, when his flour supplier told him about the crumbler and its inventor, Frank Wallet.
Alors je suis pas du tout boulanger, hein, je suis urbaniste à la base, mais j'avais envie de lutter contre le gaspillage alimentaire parce que c'est un problème à la fois environnemental, économique et social.
His solution? Crumbs, which can be stored for months if dried properly. But bakers told Wallet there's no easy way to grind down their loaves. So in 2015, Wallet quit his job as a city planner and worked with a group of engineers to create a crumbler prototype.
Voilà, vous avez une grille avec des petits trous pour la petite chapelure et des gros trous pour faire quelque chose de plus épais.
Bread is one of the staples of any complete French meal. French consumers expect it to be fresh and without preservatives. That leaves the country's 30,000 independent bakeries with a lot of unsold goods. Many businesses donate that bread at the end of the day, and since 2016, the French government has forbidden supermarkets from throwing away their leftover food. But even with those policies, there's simply too much bread. Wallet estimates that about 10% of each bakery's production goes to the trash.
Ça peut être quelques baguettes, comme ça peut être plusieurs kilos chaque jour. Et également, dans les supermarchés, il y a beaucoup de pain qui part à la poubelle, qui ne peut pas toujours être distribué.
Bread is one of the most wasted foods around the world. Other companies have found fresh ideas of what to do with it. In the Netherlands, Met de Stad collects discarded loaves from the streets around Rotterdam to turn into natural gas. Biova, an Italian brewery, makes old bread into beer. One advantage of the crumbler is that it can be used with any type of bread, but getting the word out takes time.
Alors on a encore beaucoup de chemin à parcourir, hein, c'est le début, et on a une dizaine de machines dans le monde.
For some bakers, the price of the crumbler is a deal breaker. The machine costs almost €500 for a 1-month trial, or more than $2,000 to buy outright. But Devenant says it was worth the investment.
Oui, on économise énormément d'argent puisque en fait on ne jette plus de pain, on recycle en fait le pain que l'on n'utilise pas.
He's created a variety of recipes based on the crumbs.
Guillaume, c'est un super boulanger qui s'est pas posé de questions, qui a commencé tout de suite dans cette démarche et qui a eu plein de nouvelles idées de recettes et notamment me surprend tous les jours.
So, how do customers feel about buying their daily bread from yesterday?
Bonjour. C'est le boulanger qui m'en a parlé quand il a sorti sa baguette et avec le pain recyclé. Donc j'ai goûté et j'ai apprécié. Ça se donne un petit côté un peu toasté au pain et en plus, comme il y a moins d'eau dans le pain, il se conserve plus longtemps aussi.
Instead of recycled, Wallet prefers to call the items made with breadcrumbs escaped recipes.
L'idée, c'était vraiment de donner de la valeur aux produits parce qu'on est sur des produits qualitatifs et que les gens les achètent pas forcément parce qu'ils sont revalorisés, mais parce qu'ils sont bons, parce qu'ils sont généreux, parce qu'ils sont gourmands. Voilà, c'est ce qu'on avait envie de mettre en avant.
This liquid gold came from a pile of circuit boards. And these days, there could be more gold in a landfill than in a mine. But extracting it is an expensive and polluting process, often carried out at toxic dumps. Now, a New Zealand startup has found a cleaner and safer way to do that. And its secret ingredient comes from nature. Microscopic organisms that evolved to absorb precious metals. But can this complex process reinvent how we deal with the world's fastest growing waste stream? We visited the test plant to find out. Mint innovation begins with the circuit boards that are inside nearly every electronic device.
So this is how the electronics, the circuit boards, this is how we receive them. Cut up, shredded into pieces.
The company says it sources all raw material from a local recycler.
Exporting waste is an absolutely abhorrent thing for human race to be doing.
The company's founders think that if it's easier to get valuable metals from e-waste, countries will choose to deal with it locally.
A lot of the gold's wrapped up in these chips.
The first step is to grind the circuit boards into a sand-like consistency. Workers shovel this sand into a reactor, which mixes it with inexpensive chemicals.
Those acids and oxidants are pretty commonly available industrial chemicals.
Next, machines pump the mixture into a filter press to separate the liquids from the solids. This blue fluid contains a high concentration of copper, tin, and other less valuable metals. Mint uses electricity to pull out the copper.
We simply put that through a series of plates, pass it over that have electric current flowing through them, and that plates out the copper from solution.
The metals that pay the bills are the gold, the palladium, the copper and the tin because they're most abundant and most valuable.
But at this step in Mint's process, palladium and gold are still stuck in the solids. They're harder to dissolve and require another chemical bath.
For the precious metals, you need something with a little bit more oomph, so that's why we break it into two stages.
The next step in Mint's process makes it one of a kind, and it requires the help of nature.
We're the first people to use microorganisms to selectively concentrate precious metals. We're kind of inventing the whole technology along the way.
Mint's team identified these tiny helpers in 2017 through a series of research trips to places like abandoned mines or fields with rusty equipment.
Given enough pressure and time, microbes seem to find a way to thrive in any environment.
They collected species of bacteria and fungi that evolved to bond with specific metals.
Our microorganisms recover gold, they also recover palladium.
But these are not pathogens by any stretch of the imagination. So would I drink a vial of them? Probably not, but I wouldn't drink a vial of a lot of things. So
over several hours, the microbes will gain weight as they absorb precious metal ions.
And we've now got a concentrated microbial paste that contains a good portion of precious metal.
When the paste dries out, the gold nanoparticles in it start to appear purple.
Gold has this funny property that when it is in small nanoparticles, as well, I mean, gold and colour have this hue of blues to reds.
The mixture is ready for the last step.
So this is where the final bit of magic happens where we burn off the microbial part, just leaving the metal part behind that they've captured.
Our product is a gold-rich ash. That goes to a refiner who is the one who turns it into your 99.99% gold.
It takes 1 week to extract 150 grams of gold from 1 ton of circuit boards. The founders carry around this solid gold coin to show what that looks like.
Is it pure gold?
That's pure gold.
Super heavy.
It seems like a lot of work for a small payoff. Is it really worth the trouble? Mint's founders say yes, because it's getting harder to mine precious metals from the earth.
The big gold mines are recovering literally grams, 3, 4, 5 grams of gold from a ton of rock. 81% of gold that's identified today is already above the ground.
And as gold mines are depleted, the amount of e-waste generated globally has increased steadily over the past decades. If those trends continue, by 2050, we'll have to deal with 110 million metric tons of e-waste every year. That's like every person in the world throwing away a countertop microwave. Up to 1/5 of all e-waste moves across borders, likely ending up in developing countries where workers process it by hand at illegal dump sites. Activist Jim Puckett has spent over 25 years tracking how e-waste ends up in these toxic environments.
The entire life cycle of electronics, unfortunately, disproportionately burdens the global south with the real environmental harm and pollution.
Thousands of people worldwide make a living extracting copper from e-waste, primarily by burning it. Inhaling the fumes damages workers' lungs and increases their risk for cancer and other illnesses.
We are suffering for a year because the heat is there, where the smoke to the disturb us.
Other studies have found that large e-waste dumps contaminate water, soil, and crops. Even if e-waste is properly recycled, the final product still needs to go to a smelter, the energy-intensive endpoint for most mining operations. Mint's long-term goal is to make it easy and profitable for cities to process their e-waste locally.
We need to kind of get this, really cranking throughout the world, and that's probably a 20-year vision.
The company is planning full-scale facilities in Australia and the United Kingdom. This smaller plant in Auckland, New Zealand, was built to demonstrate how Mint's process works. It processes about 1 metric ton of circuit boards per week, but larger plants, like the one they're building in Australia, will process 10 metric tons per day. That would make the bigger plant able to process about 1% of all the e-waste Australia produces annually. The planned larger facilities will be almost entirely automated.
It's pretty light touch from a personnel perspective. Might have 3 people on the shop floor at any one time, running 24/7.
The small number of employees would have limited contact with e-waste, keeping them safe from exposure to toxic compounds. However, even if Mint can realize its dream of a plant in every major city, the founders face another problem that's completely out of their control.
And unfortunately, electronic waste generally is getting less and less valuable over time as a commodity.
Manufacturers are learning to build gadgets with less precious metal. Mint's team is researching other types of waste they can run through this process, like car parts. As for solving the global e-waste problem, Jim Puckett remains skeptical that any form of recycling is the answer.
I'm not saying don't go ahead with these techniques. We're certainly going to have old circuit boards around for a long time, and we're going to have to deal with them. So let's move on it. But we got to turn off the tap.
That tap is controlled by the companies who manufacture electronics, most of whom have no legal or financial incentive to design products that can be recycled.
It's an overflowing bathtub. You can't run around with mops and say, oh my God, we got to mop this up, we got to mop that up, and we have a better mop here and a better mop there. When the tap is pouring water into the bathtub, it's overflowing down the stairs. This is the problem we have, is the tap of our waste is not being turned back.
plates are made from the tops of pineapples that are shredded, mixed with some recycled paper, and turned into sheets that are left out to dry under the sun. A machine presses the sheets into form. And if these disposable plates end up in a place with soil and water, tiny seeds inside will blossom in a few days.
El producto fue diseñado no solamente para que se degradara o se biodegradara o se compostara, sino además quisimos ir más allá porque es que el producto te genera vida.
On a busy day, workers at LifePack can churn out 10,000 eco-friendly plates.
Hemos usado residuos que antiguamente los estaban botando y eso lo estamos transformando. Entonces, esa es la ventaja, esa es la diferencia que nosotros estamos haciendo.
In addition to plates, the company also makes sandwich containers and coffee cup sleeves that contain seeds from edible plants like cilantro, amaranth, and strawberry. LifePack caps its own carbon footprint by working with local suppliers.
Para hacer nuestros cartones y papeles nosotros no talamos árboles y eso es un factor esencial porque, digamos, dejamos de talar 16 árboles por cada tonelada de producto hecho por nosotros.
It sources pineapple waste from a nearby processing plant. The plant's owners charge nothing for the pineapple crowns. They're happy that someone is willing to turn their waste into a resource.
Nosotros lo que hemos buscado es cómo hacer el tema de la economía circular y la corona pues nos parece que no puede quedar en mejores manos que en ellos que han hecho un trabajo tan bonito. Pues para nosotros lo que ellos hacen es muy importante.
Husband and wife team Claudia Barona and Andres Benavides founded LifePack 12 years ago in the city of Cali. The couple has won several small business awards, and they even appeared on the Colombian version of Shark Tank.
Porque cada vez que nosotros veíamos que habían reuniones en casas, en apartamentos, en fincas, en asados, en parques, siempre veíamos la contaminación tan grande que había con estos otros productos tradicionales, que son de plástico o de espuma.
Colombia, like nearly every country in the world, is trying to reduce plastic waste. In 2017, the country introduced a tax on single-use plastics that increases each year. And in some cities, informal pickers are now paid as municipal workers. But getting consumers to buy these products isn't easy.
Cuando nosotros iniciamos, que fue hace más o menos unos 10 años, la gente nos decía que estábamos locos, porque aquí en Colombia, casualmente, la gente no era muy amigable con el medio ambiente. Todo el mundo utilizaba lo más barato.
The LifePack plates retail at about $2.50 per dozen. That's more than double the price of plastic plates from a big box store. Despite their higher price point, LifePack has been able to capitalize on growing demand for sustainable packaging, which has increased by 40% since the company started. Its plates are now sold in 3 large supermarket chains domestically. The company also handles dozens of orders through its website each week, with a handful of customers in the US.
En un solo turno de trabajo podríamos hacer quizás unos entre 6,000 y 12,000 platos. De hecho, ahorita hay más demanda que oferta, entonces estamos sobrevendidos. Eso significa que la respuesta en el cliente es positiva y que el producto tiene un mercado.
LifePack's next challenge is to modernize its equipment so it can boost production. Andres and Claudia also plan to franchise the business and expand into new countries to help more people cut back on plastic, one plate at a time. This coffin is alive. It's made from mushrooms that soak up the toxins human bodies leave behind, and it eliminates the need for massive amounts of wood, steel, and concrete used to bury the dead. Funerals in the US use enough of these materials every year to build a tower of caskets the size of the Empire State Building. The loop coffin grows in a lab in 7 days and absorbs into the soil in under 2 months. But can it replace traditional burials? We visited the creator of the world's first mushroom coffin to find out.
This is definitely my baby, yes. I think about it when I wake up, I think about it when I go to sleep. Yeah, I see them. We got some friends.
Bob Hendricks searches for the building blocks for a loop coffin in Delfshout Forest in the Netherlands.
It's easy to find mushrooms, but it's hard to find the specific one you need. Some are edible, but some might kill you as well. Aha!
He harvests samples to bring back to the lab every weekend.
And this is not the one we use, but we could make a coffin out of it. We can try. This one might be the holy grail. Here you can see all the wires, so it's almost like veins of the organism.
It's mycelium, thin white fibers that grow easily on all kinds of surfaces.
Mycelium is the root structure of mushrooms, and simply said, they're just the recyclers of nature. So everything that turns into death, they turn it into life.
It feeds on decaying plants and animals, expanding at a rate of ½ an inch per day.
From this little piece of mycelium, we can grow a living coffin.
Really?
Yeah.
Back at Loop's headquarters, Bob and his team mix the mycelium with wet sawdust and spray it with a secret sauce that helps it grow. Then they seal it in a plastic mold shaped like a coffin. This part of the process is also a secret. Fungus fills in the empty space and it dries within a week. It's a building technique that Bob has been experimenting with for years.
Right now, we tend to work with dead materials, while I envision a world in which we work together with organisms.
The final product is light but sturdy.
It's almost like a sort of styrofoam material, so it's really rigid, yet it's super lightweight.
It can carry up to 440 pounds. Each coffin is lined with a layer of moss sourced from a local farm.
The moss has two functions. That it helps to decompose the body faster and rich in biodiversity. And the other one is to give humans the experience of becoming part of the cycle of life.
A body interned in a Loop coffin should not be embalmed or wear any synthetic materials, so it can transform into soil faster. That was an exciting prospect for Johannes Penhuisen. The 82-year-old doctor became one of the first people buried in a Loop coffin last year. This is his final resting place, in a special area designated by the Dutch government for natural burials.
It became something like a beautiful thing, you know, because it was a special coffin and he really liked it.
Most people's deaths leave a much larger footprint. A conventionally buried body contains a mix of over 200 chemicals, from tobacco residues to dry cleaning chemicals, pesticides, heavy metals, and embalming fluids. It can take up to 12 years for an embalmed body to turn into a skeleton, but soft tissues release toxic chemicals and microbes after only a few months. And traditional coffins contain preservatives, paint, and have metal handles. All of these substances can leach into soil and water, making it unhealthy for the living. Loop coffins can fix this because of a process called mycoremediation. That means that mushrooms will chow down on almost anything, even pollution.
These fungi, of course, can have a lot of intake of heavy metals and all kind of chemical components because they store it in their hyphae, in the fungus body.
But breaking old habits can be difficult. Replacing bodily fluids with preservatives started during the American Civil War. The bodies of fallen soldiers needed to be transported long distances for burial. Embalming made it possible for President Lincoln's open casket to remain on display for a 3-week train trip from Washington to Illinois, and it has been standard practice ever since. Bob wants people to return to the natural practices that existed for most of history.
As humans, why are we not part of the cycle? And we can actually enable people to feed the earth instead of pollute it.
The company sold about 100 coffins last year, priced at €1,500 apiece, about $1,800. That's cheaper than even the most basic wooden caskets, and a fraction of the $7,500 that Americans pay for a mid-priced funeral. Loop's off to a modest start, but globally, green funerals are becoming more popular.
People are really interested in new things in the funeral business, and our members are asking if they can use the Loop coffin for their burial.
Today, they make up a small proportion of overall funerals, but 2 in 3 American consumers say they'd consider a green burial. And they have a growing list of over 300 providers to choose from. Given enough time, we all return to dust. But Bob Hendricks hopes we'll choose instead to become compost.
These aluminum can pop tabs are being washed and will eventually be turned into designer handbags. Bottle-top bags aim to highlight excessive waste in the garment industry.
There's over, I think, 8% of global greenhouse emissions are caused by the fashion industry, and Bottletop is responding to that.
After they've been cleaned, workers separate the pop tabs and paint them. Then, women like Anna take over. Using a method similar to crochet, weavers arrange the pop tabs into patterns that adorn a variety of fashionable bags. Today, Anna is working on the Balani. This bag will take her about 8 hours to make, using exactly 1,152 pop tabs. People in Brazil have a long-standing tradition of crocheting with pop tabs. It's a craft that the co-founders of Bottletop encountered on a trip there in 2007.
We just started looking into more as to how we can produce these products. And eventually we created our own atelier in Salvador, helping people from 2 disenfranchised communities and giving them skills and livelihood to be able to create these products and support the people.
Every year, Bottletop upcycles close to 1,500 pounds of pop tabs, about the same weight as a smart car. That may not seem like a lot, considering people worldwide drink and throw away about 180 billion soda cans annually. But according to ethical fashion experts, every little bit counts.
Production of garments wastes more energy than the aircraft and shipping markets combined globally. And that just kind of, for me, puts it into perspective how massive this problem is. But it's brands like Bottletop that are working with smaller communities and really making such a huge impact on the ground with the people that they work with. And that's really where it starts.
Ethical fashion is a movement towards fair practices in every step of the supply chain, from sustainably sourcing raw materials to paying employees fair wages. And it's a growing market. The demand for ethically produced fashion products could grow to $8 billion by 2023.
We're seeing a really big shift in consumer behavior towards more responsible production within the fashion industry. We're seeing even kind of big corporate fashion brands collaborating with maybe younger brands or artists whose core part of their work is to use upcycling, and together they have been creating capsule collections or maybe one-off pieces.
Luciano Rodriguez is in charge of collecting the recycled materials used in Bottletop bags. He buys them from the city's waste pickers or goes directly to dump sites where they are sorted and sold.
So we will now get the ripples in a machine, wash, dry, then we make a selection all by one, so all by hand. After that, we go back to the machine again to do a second wash.
The Bottletop bags end up in London, in the world's first 3D printed store made from recycled plastic.
We are smack bang in the middle of central London on Regent Street. What you're standing on right now is the equivalent of 70 recycled truck tyres. Above us you can see 3,000 recycled cans, and the walls, you can see this kind of ribbed structure is actually 3D printed waste plastic.
The Balani starts at $250, while a higher-end bag, like Elise, can cost over $600.
There's no reason why there shouldn't be more sustainable stores. We should be the norm. This should be the way that fashion is going to make sure to give ourselves the best chance of preserving the planet and reducing carbon emissions.
Even in a pandemic, the store itself has been a magnet for high street shoppers, but it is the Bottletop story that keeps them coming back.
I think the more we read and the more we hear about where our planet and our choices are taking us, the more important it is to make choices, in particular in festive times when we're making presents for each other, that are nice and we appreciate, but also have some sort of positive impact for the wider community, the wider planet.
These fibers are made from old clothes. It's part of a process that can turn nearly any used fabric into something brand new. And fashion retailer H&M bets this solution could eventually recycle some of the billions of tons of textile waste produced every year. But can a fast fashion company solve the problem it helped create? We went to Hong Kong and Sweden to find out. Most recycled textiles are turned into mattress stuffing or insulation. And the original materials are scraps from the factory floor, not used clothing. But this facility inside a Hong Kong shopping mall is the first in the world to turn used clothes into new clothes, all in one place. First, a technician like Emily Shao examines the garment.
So today we will recycle old garments.
This ozone chamber sanitizes the fabric in about an hour. Then, Emily removes the buttons, labels, and zippers, and cuts the garment so the fabric is easy to work with. The shredder strips the bits of cloth down further.
And then I will take off the open fabrics.
But this part of the process does require some new materials.
So we will add some virgin fibers into the yarns to make it stronger.
Another machine mixes that cotton with the recycled skirt. Emily then rolls the mixed fibers into clumps and feeds them into a machine that turns them into what's called a fiber web. But what happens next makes the assembly line in Hong Kong the first of its kind. The fiber web gets bundled into these snake-like slivers. The slivers are then spun into ply yarn, the building blocks of a new garment. Finally, a machine knits a new sweater based on a computer design. Shoppers pay about $65 to recycle clothing here.
How do we help consumers think about their clothes differently? Well, that's one of the reasons why we have a glass box doing research in a shopping mall.
The H&M Foundation partnered with the Hong Kong Research Institute of Textiles and Apparel. That investment allowed the company to license and install the technology at one of their stores in Stockholm, where the company is headquartered. H&M calls it the Loop. Here, shoppers pay only $18 to see the recycling process in action. That's about the price of a new pair of the brand's sweatpants.
That's how it comes out. And then this is the only part that has to be removed.
Virginia, the technician, trims the extra yarn and the garment is ready to go. It takes 3 days to recycle one garment. That seems like a lot of time and effort to turn a sweater into a new sweater. That's because a factory like this that can recycle thousands of tons of clothes a day doesn't exist yet. But H&M says that eventually this kind of technology could be a global solution for textile waste.
The holy grail is a garment-to-garment recycling. And that's for me where today most of our investment going to.
But the fashion retailer continues to grow by selling cheap clothes to more and more people.
How often do you go and buy new clothes?
Maybe one time a week.
How big is your wardrobe?
It's like maybe half of my apartment.
Well, retail kings and queens. She needs a walk-in closet, yes.
But Swedes aren't the biggest contributors to textile waste. The average American spends over $1,800 a year on new clothes and throws away 200 t-shirts worth of textiles every year. People didn't always treat clothing as disposable. Fast fashion really took off in the 1990s, thanks to polyester. The synthetic fiber made from petroleum costs half as much as cotton.
I think very few people realize that most of the time today they're wearing plastic.
By the year 2000, polyester overtook cotton as the most popular fiber in the world. That's the same year H&M opened its first US store in New York City. Since then, global clothing production has doubled, and if nothing changes, it will nearly double again by 2030. All that used apparel can end up in places like Accra, Ghana, which has one of the world's largest secondhand clothing markets. Every week, 15 million garments pass through the Contamonto market, and nearly half of that goes to landfill, is burned, or gets swept into waterways.
We've completely devalued what clothing is. Clothing is now disposable, and I don't know how we come back from treating it like a plastic bag or like a plastic bottle.
Liz Ricketts has spent over a decade documenting how used clothes from wealthy countries are exported around the world.
The clothing that's going to landfill, a lot of it is wearable.
And a lot of the waste comes from familiar brands.
It's definitely top 10, which are what you would expect. I mean, it's H&M, it's Zara, it's M&S, Adidas, Nike, Gap.
It would take the loop recycling machine almost 50,000 years to deal with just 1 week's worth of waste from the market.
You can't really convince yourself that creating clothing but doing it better is somehow going to solve this issue that there's simply too much clothing.
Still, H&M executives say they're serious about scaling up recycling. The company has set a goal of using only recycled polyester by the end of the decade.
We have developed, together with Hong Kong Rita, a machine called the Green Machine.
The H&M Foundation invested $12 million into technologies like this machine that recycles polyester, and plans to build a larger factory that can recycle over 3,000 pounds of clothes per day. But HK Rita's CEO admits that recycling has a long way to go before it can make a dent in the industry's growing waste output.
The commercial scale, useful recycling systems have to be in the order of magnitude of at least thousands of tons a day.
Today, less than 1% of used clothing is recycled into new garments.
It is clear to us that we don't have a lot of time. We have this danger of doing too little too late.
Experts say that recycling can never solve the problem of textile waste.
Brands have basically convinced citizens that we have a waste problem because we don't have recycling technology. That is not that is not why we have a waste problem. It's only going to be solvable if we confront growth and if companies stop overproducing.
H&M has no plans to reduce production of new clothing.
We are a growth company. Our ambition is how do we make that growth being meaningful?
And consumers can do their part by buying less and holding on to their current wardrobe longer.
We always recommend that people take a year off of buying anything new.
Even HK Rita's CEO recognizes recycling alone can't solve the problem. The companies that manufacture clothes will need to change the way they do business. And that is what keeps him up at night.
My nightmare scenario in the industry is that we are satisfied. We're happy with very modest goals, but that doesn't really do anything for anybody. And then we'll be accused of greenwashing, and by and large, it'll be true.
For years, people have dumped all kinds of waste into the ocean, even Coast Guard ships like this. The idea is that new coral will latch onto these massive objects and attract fish. But just because it sinks doesn't mean it will help. In fact, some of these damaged pre-existing coral. Now, a company has said their artificial reef is safe for all marine life. The secret ingredient? It's made from the remains of the dead. There are thousands of memorial reef balls like this one off the eastern seaboard. They've become successful habitats and protect hundreds of millions of dollars of real estate from storm surge flooding. But with natural reefs dying off at an alarming rate, can these underwater graveyards actually make a difference? The two most important factors for a good reef are the materials you use and making sure it stays put. Larry Beggs and his team at Reef Innovations designed this bottom-heavy reef ball to withstand violent sea currents. They can weigh up to 5 tons. The chemicals in conventional concrete can harm sea creatures, so Reef Innovations has to use a special mix.
The concrete is a pH-neutralized marine-grade concrete that is very important for coral growth. Oysters, corals, invertebrates, and stuff that will grow on the reef can attach to the reef ball very easily.
The company uses fiberglass panels to form the basic shape of the ball. They insert an inflated buoy to keep the center hollow, creating the holes that fish like to swim through. Once the concrete dries, the team rinses the balls with a mixture of sugar and water to expose the surfaces where sea life will grow. This is where the dead people come in. A company called Eternal Reefs uses Larry's creations for their memorials. They've dropped almost 2,500 of them over the past 20 years.
We work with families who have lost somebody and had their loved one cremated. They will come to one of our project sites.
The families mix cremated remains with concrete to make a separate centerpiece for the reef ball. They call it a pearl.
What you're going to do is you're going to put your hand down and rock it back and forth. We put fresh concrete on the top of the reef ball, and then they put handprints, they write messages. Families are invited to bring things that represent their loved one's life as long as they're not environmentally harmful.
The remains replace some of the sand normally used in concrete.
They give you actually the bucket and the mix, and then you pour your remains into that mix and you stir it.
Phyllis Flowers lost her son to brain cancer when he was just 20 years old.
So there's my son. I had no idea what the Eternal Reef was until John found it. In a small way, he was giving back to the world in his mind by being able to add to the ecology of the coral reef that will save, of course, our seashores and build back sea animals and fish.
Families take their finished reef balls out to the open water, say a few words, maybe a prayer, and drop the memorial down to the seabed. The whole process costs about the same as a conventional cemetery burial. On Florida's Atlantic coast, another company is in the underwater burial business. The Neptune Memorial Reef is the final resting place for over 1,000 people. Here, the human remains are mixed into statues shaped like starfish or stingrays. It's also a tourist attraction.
We estimate there's probably over 2,000 divers a month that visit the Neptune Reef.
Over the past century, people hope to create scenic dive sites in other places. They've dropped passenger airplanes, car tires, even old battleships.
It was really companies looking for cheaper ways of disposing products that they weren't using anymore, or the military had ships or tanks. And I think over time, there's increased recognition that these were not good for the environment.
In the early 1970s, a nonprofit working with the Army Corps of Engineers dumped 2 million tires off the coast of Fort Lauderdale. The group optimistically called it the Osborne Reef, but the coral never grew. Seawater corroded the tires as well as the steel clips and nylon bonds holding them together. They broke apart, wiping out nearby natural reefs. Decades later, Florida began a cleanup expected to end by 2028. Some 600,000 tires are still down there. Healthy reefs provide a home for a quarter of all marine life, protect thousands of people from hurricane damage, and contribute over $4 billion to Florida's economy every year. But even the best designed artificial reefs can't keep up with climate change. Unless carbon emissions are reduced, all coral reefs could be gone by 2050.
It's going to take all of us, and now is the time. This is our decade.
For now, reef burials haven't reached the mainstream. Even if every one of the 3.4 million Americans who died last year ended up in their own reef ball, it would still only replace about 1 square mile of Florida's shrinking reefs.
If we did that around the world, it probably would help, but we aren't, So I feel good about what we're doing.
Perhaps this kind of memorial is just a person's final act of hope that things can get better.
Now's a time where we need a healthy ocean more than ever.
People throw out millions of tons of furniture every year. In America, the amount of furniture sent to landfill has nearly doubled from 35 years ago. That's about the same time IKEA opened its first US store. Now, the company is trying to keep its stuff out of the trash. IKEA plans to make all of its 10,000 products from renewable or recycled materials. And they launched a buyback program in 30 countries. Can IKEA really solve the furniture waste problem it helped create? We went to Vancouver, Canada, to see how the company is trying to make it work. Katie Dixon estimates about a fifth of the furniture in her apartment comes from IKEA.
Our media shelves are from IKEA. Yeah, we've got the IKEA special here.
The IKEA store in Vancouver has a program that rewards customers for bringing in used furniture. People upload a photo online, wait to hear if their piece is in acceptable condition,
A few minor scuffs and marks.
and then drop it off. Today, she's calling the store to try and resell these Cal-X shelves.
We just need to downsize a little bit.
It costs $35 brand new.
I got a gift card because there's a promotion right now where you get double the amount. Originally, I would have gotten $15 for the item, and with the promotion, I got $30 back. Thank you.
The items end up in a special section of the store after being cleaned up.
As soon as we put out, it's just flies. They just can't believe that's so cheap.
IKEA revolutionized home furnishing with easy-to-ship flat-pack furniture made from particle board. But a lot of its pieces are much less durable than objects made from solid wood, so they can end up on the curb. The buyback service offers an alternative. Last year, it helped give 39 million products a second life. But not every customer is successful in using the program. In another part of Vancouver, Maria Hernandez also lives in a home surrounded by IKEA products.
Basically all our plates and bowls are from IKEA. Plus the glasses, the step stool. This is also from IKEA. And this helps me because I'm very short, so I can reach stuff like that, which is also from IKEA. Oh, and this light is also from IKEA. And it's very kind of like mid-century modern.
She's trying to sell back her Raskog utility cart. Within a few hours, Maria heard back.
My item was rejected because of the rust, and the guy on the phone suggested that I could clean it off, but I think I'm gonna not bother with it.
In the end, Maria gave her blue cart to a friend. She may have had better luck if she shipped the cart to Sweden. There, in IKEA's home country, a secondhand store salvages furniture from the recycling center next door. IKEA opened in the Rayatuna Mall in 2020 to find out if selling refurbished furniture in a smaller location is economically viable. People drop off hundreds of items here every day. So the first step is sorting.
Here you can see the queue of stuff that we collected today. Maybe around 40, and that is a really good morning.
Refurbishers steam clean and paint furniture.
Almost as clean as the product that we sell in the department store. So you do a really good work, Johan.
But not everything makes the cut. Rejected items head back out to the recycling center.
So now it's up to the company, for this example IKEA, to take care of the item that is donated to them.
IKEA plans to keep it going at least until November 2021 to see if this model can expand globally and eventually turn a profit. IKEA's pitch is simple. Stylish furniture can be cheap. But that marketing mantra created a mountain of disposable products.
For a long time, IKEA advertised their goods as if this disposability was almost a bonus. It was a benefit. You get rid of it because you were tired of it and you didn't have to feel guilty about it. In fact, in one advertisement, they ended by saying, the new one is always so much better.
And the new one is much better.
It's a problematic model for a company aiming to become the greenest in the world.
We are on a journey to become climate positive and a circular company by 2030, which means that we look at the material we source to shift to renewable and recycled materials.
Reaching that goal would likely make a massive impact on the furniture industry. Over 700 million people visited IKEA stores by the spring of 2020. That means that 4 times more people went to an IKEA than tested positive for the coronavirus last year. In fact, the pandemic was great for business. IKEA sales increased by nearly half as people stuck at home looked to make their life more comfortable. The company grew to a $50 billion behemoth by keeping things as cheap as possible. That's not always compatible with sustainability.
When you produce this many goods for this many people at a relatively low price, and one of your focuses is always keeping the price as low as possible, you're inevitably going to cut corners, which of course they do.
And IKEA's footprint is massive. According to one report, IKEA is the single largest consumer of wood in the world, responsible for cutting down a tree every second. IKEA says that's not true, but it does use about as much wood as the entire Russian Federation exports in 1 year. The company claims that nearly 100% of its wood bears the seal of the Forest Stewardship Council. That's an international body that certifies sustainably harvested wood. But last year, an investigation by the environmental organization Earthsite alleged that nearly half of the wood IKEA sources from Eastern Europe is logged illegally.
Not only does FSC certification not guarantee that your wood is sustainably sourced, it doesn't even guarantee that it's devoid of connections to illegal logging, and much worse.
A spokesperson for IKEA Wood Supply and Forestry told Insider that independent investigations showed no illegally logged wood entered the IKEA supply chain from Ukraine.
And FSC did another greenwash investigation of one particular supply chain in Ukraine. They didn't look at other supply chains in Ukraine, they didn't look at other supply chains in Russia, and they certainly haven't forced FSC to make the fundamental changes to its systems and procedures, which would prevent it being abused in the way that we've seen, both here in this case and also around the world.
Critics say IKEA's environmental promises are more about marketing than actually reducing waste or improving sustainability.
I think that IKEA is making some efforts now, but I think you have to be very careful because they always have. You know, there's a good bit of greenwashing by that company.
Still, IKEA's efforts are better than the alternative.
So the solution is not to go elsewhere, because the reality is that other companies, other big furniture retailers are as bad, if not worse.
And the easiest solution to furniture waste doesn't cost a penny.
Ultimately, you need to buy less. Right now, you need to buy less. People need to buy less and need to throw away less, and they need to make do and mend more.
Everything in the shopping mall is recycled. Ria Tuna is the first secondhand mall in the world. Here, shop owners profit from what other people don't want.
I found some jeans, a table.
It's really old phones.
You can find everything here. It's just your imagination.
But this is not your grandmother's antique shop. The Ria Tuna Mall has a staff of 50 professionals who clean, fix, and tag every item.
The one is just being cleaned up a little bit.
What makes this possible is the mall's location, right next door to the Municipal Recycling Center.
Oh, hey!
And the local government helps pay for it. It's a model on how to save perfectly good stuff from being thrown away.
Bye-bye.
Something that's a problem in a lot of other countries. In the US alone, 11 million tons of clothing, shoes, and textiles end up in landfills every year. Ria Tuna has diverted tons of potential waste since it opened 6 years ago, while generating millions in revenue for small businesses. Even Sweden's most famous company, IKEA, refurbishes its furniture here. So could fixing recycling be as simple as a conveniently placed mall? We went to Eskilstuna, Sweden, nicknamed the world's recycling capital, to find out. People donate hundreds of used items at Ria Tuna every day.
They do not get any money for it. They do it by heart.
Sofia has managed the mall since 2020.
Och alla de här, det här är ju jättespännande. It could be anything. It could be electronics. It could be furniture. It could be textile.
Teamwork. If you don't need your old clothes, you can just put it in there and
One central place to get rid of all your stuff, and you know that is going back into use again, which is really good.
Mall workers sort the items in a massive storage area that's closed to the public. They'll sort things based on which one of RiaTuna's 14 stores they're headed to.
This is a sewing machine, and this is going to a store called Axelina that is selling vintage clothing and textiles.
The shops pay nothing for the donated items, but they do pay rent for their retail spaces.
Here is Axelina's box. She already has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sewing machines that she is going to repair.
Usually it doesn't work. Sometimes it's just they need a little bit of oil, a little bit of love.
Every shop here has their own box or their own white stripes. So here you can see it's IKEA's box.
Now the co-workers will try to find out which furniture comes from IKEA.
Every day, Camilla and her team sort through dozens of items that could be resold at IKEA's secondhand store.
Here you can see the queue of stuff that we collected today. Maybe 40 today. And that is a really good morning.
But not everything makes the cut. Anything rejected heads back out to the recycling center next door.
So now it's up to the company, IKEA, to take care of the item that is donated to them.
Refurbishers for IKEA's secondhand store paint and steam clean furniture.
Almost as clean as the product that we sell in the department store. So you do a really good work, Johan.
In other areas, old items can be upcycled into something new and unique.
I'm building a Barbie house home for my grandkids. It will be a really good one to take the Barbie for a good swim.
Electronics are also fixed up. Every day, over 700 people shop at the RiaTuna Mall. Shop owners set their own prices, which means shoppers can always find a bargain.
Was it cheap?
Yes, 50 crowns. Perfect.
A lot of the customers have a quite small wallet, so they would like to get a lot of value for the money.
But it's not just about the money. Other shoppers are just out looking for that one-of-a-kind discovery.
I bought a picture, 59 crowns. It's very cheap.
RiaTuna is part of a larger initiative to breathe new life into Eskilstuna, a place that went into decline after the collapse of its steel industry in the 1970s. About a decade ago, the city kickstarted its economy by going green. Now, biogas made from trash fuels buses and heats homes. Bike lanes wrap around public parks. The waste processing plant is experimenting with black soldier fly larvae to make compost faster. And the mall of used stuff is a success. For the smaller shops, business is booming. Sales topped $1.8 million in 2020.
Actually, last year, when the pandemic was greater than ever, we have the highest revenue here for the shops.
But the IKEA secondhand store hasn't broken even. The company opened the shop as a 6-month trial, part of IKEA's sustainability initiative.
We do have some difficulties with the pandemic because we don't have that much customer that we hoped for.
I like that it's IKEA, but we don't have IKEA like the big shop in our city.
So could the next RiaTuna Mall be coming to a town near you?
That it's the only one in the world, actually, but I'm really hoping that it's going to be a lot of it all over the world, of course.
But most places aren't like Sweden. The Swedes have one of the best recycling programs in the world. Less than 1% of household waste goes to landfill. The country's gotten so good at recycling, it's had to buy trash from other countries to keep its waste-to-energy facilities humming. Anybody raised in Sweden knows how to separate trash into 5 colorful bins. The city of Eskilstuna takes it to the next level. Most households separate their waste into 7 different colored bags. It's a system that makes it easier for automated sorting machines to do their job at the waste plant. But in the US, where 50% of waste still goes to landfill, donating used items isn't as commonplace. Secondhand sales are usually handled by charities like Salvation Army or Goodwill, rather than subsidized by the local government, like RiaTuna is. But the desire to donate is shifting stateside. Drop-off donations to Goodwill and Salvation Army were up in 2020, It overwhelmed some Goodwill stores so much, they had to pay $1 million trash bill to get rid of overflow items. And there's a growing trend towards buying clothes secondhand in the US. With over 2,600 overflowing landfills and hundreds of declining malls, maybe the solution is just a matter of building both a little closer together.
This is how algae is turned into plastic. One company bets this green powder can replace at least some plastic in almost any product, while also cleaning the air and water. Too much algae can hurt natural ecosystems, and sometimes make toxins that endanger humans and animals. Can this invention rid the world of harmful algae and fight greenhouse gases? We visited 2 factories on opposite sides of the globe to find out. It's a race against time to clean harmful algae out of waterways before it dies.
It'll sink to the bottom, it'll decompose, it'll release those nutrients back into the water column, and then with sunlight and water again, you're gonna have another bloom.
Rotting algae also releases methane, a greenhouse gas over 25 times stronger than carbon dioxide. Ryan Hunt co-founded Bloom in the hope that monetizing algae will lead to cleaner waterways. But first, you have to get microscopic algae out of the water. Bloom made a machine that can do that on the spot. Engineering firm AECOM rents the harvester and has used it to clean up harmful blooms in New York and Florida. Bloom buys algae from around the world and turns it into plastic pellets at its headquarters in Mississippi. First, workers run the algae through a grinding machine.
This equipment allows us to mill the algae into a very fine powder and select the particle size that we need for our process.
Then they blend the powder with plastic. The machine creates hot strings of the mixture. A blade cuts the strings into pellets, and water passes through the system.
The pellets are cooled out of the molten state into a rigid form, and they're dropped into a super sack where we can store them and we can package them for use by our customers.
Nearly every plastic product is made from pellets. Brands can buy Bloom's algae pellets to replace traditional ones in their products.
We started with making flower pots. That's evolved into making sneakers for Adidas and a whole bunch of other products such as sports grips and traction pads.
Now, Bloom's pellets are mostly used in foam for shoes. Algae can be a good substitute for plastic because it contains lots of protein. But algae pellets can't completely replace regular ones, or the final foam wouldn't be springy enough.
Typically, we'll use anywhere from 10 to maybe as high as 30% of the algae in the final foam, just depending on that performance need.
One of Bloom's customers makes its product here in Dongguan, China. This factory produces sock liners, the foam part of a shoe that sits under your foot. It's made from 15% Bloom pellets mixed with traditional plastic ones. Technicians carefully measure out the 2 types, and then a machine mixes them together. After that, it's business as usual for the foam factory. Workers knead the pellet mixture and shape it into sheets. Then a machine heats the sheets under pressure until they expand into foam. Workers trim the foam sheets and mold them into the finished sock liner. Bloom shares data on the environmental impact of the pellets, which brands can use for marketing.
We can calculate the environmental impact on a gram per gram basis. We can tell you exactly how much water was cleaned and how much carbon was captured in that shoe.
Ryan says each pair of sock liners kept about 8 grams of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and cleaned about 17 liters of water. Dr. Scholl's Shoes has made more than 2 million pairs of sock liners since it started working with Bloom, which the companies say kept about 17 metric tons of CO2 from the atmosphere. That number includes carbon dioxide removed from the air by algae and emissions that were prevented by using algae in place of plastic. But at the end of the day, it's still more plastic, right? Most shoes made with Bloom are not any more recyclable than regular ones.
We are faced with a difficult challenge because the footwear materials typically are made in a way that is not conducive to directly recycling them through traditional means.
And they're usually not biodegradable. But when it comes to storing greenhouse gases inside an object, not breaking down is the whole point. If the product degraded, it would release the carbon back into the atmosphere. Experts say this type of technology can help fight climate change.
Right now, we just send CO2 into the trash heap in the sky. But if you can take any of that CO2, bind it in a stable form, use it to make money and a valuable product, you want to do that.
But even if all the world's plastic contained recycled carbon, it wouldn't make a dent in emissions.
Right now, we emit 51 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year. The worldwide volume of plastic that's made every year is about 1 billion tons, so we cannot solve climate on the back of plastic. It's just too small. Nowhere close.
So is it worth it? That depends what problem you're trying to solve. Ryan says the main benefit of Bloom's work is cleaner water. Algae has become a major issue thanks mainly to wastewater pollution from farms. Fertilizers are full of nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, which make algae grow faster. Runoff creates overgrown algae that removes oxygen from the water and blocks light to creatures living below. This is called a harmful algal bloom. It can kill fish, whales, and dolphins, and make seafood unsafe to eat. In some cases, blooms can release toxins and make people sick. 43 states have documented illnesses or death of humans or animals caused by freshwater blooms. And satellite images show bloom intensity on the rise in lakes on 4 continents since the 1980s. The algae bloom sources from waterways primarily comes from Lake Tai in China. But no matter how much algae you remove, blooms will keep happening if wastewater pollution continues.
The way that we ultimately address harmful algae blooms in a long-term scenario is addressing the source of nutrients from the beginning.
That means cleaning up wastewater before it reaches rivers and lakes. The company can do this by intentionally growing algae at water treatment plants to help remove nutrients that cause blooms.
Our hope is over time, as the scale increases, we will be able to intercept more pollution upstream, which will cause less algae blooms in nature.
Bloom gets about half of its algae from lakes and half from treating wastewater. But what about the environmental impact of processing the algae and shipping it back and forth across the globe?
It does take energy to get the algae into this usable form.
A consulting firm called Earthshift analyzed Bloom's processes and found that even after you factor in these costs, algae pellets are more sustainable than plastic ones.
We're avoiding the massive amount of emissions associated with drilling for oil, extracting the oil, refining it into a specific polymer or a specific chemical.
Algae also requires less land, water, and energy than other bioplastic crops, like corn and soybeans. Ultimately, Bloom's long-term mission is to teach people that harmful algae can be put to good use.
Every city has a wastewater plant. Every wastewater plant has an algae problem, but no one's addressing it. No one's recognizing the value. If people knew that the green scum in the back of their pond had value, you bet people would be harvesting it.